أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رددت يا رب العباد وانتشت روحي.
وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون.
It is He who created the night and the day, and the sun and the moon. All the celestial bodies swim along, each in its own rounded course.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now, this is the first challenge. Now, specifically, I want to go through the last section, or the last part of the verse, which says, كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكِ يَسْبَحُونَ. All celestial bodies swim along, each in its own rounded course. Now, initially, what I wanted to do was go through a detailed grammatical and linguistic analysis of this particular section, which is composed of 4 words. You have 2 nouns or isms, 1 verb, and 1 preposition. But I realized it was going to take too long. And the words used are very precise. Inshallah, in future videos, I'll be explaining the precision of the language that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used in this particular verse. I really honestly believe that this challenge is impossible. The challenge is open to everybody to produce something better than the Quran. And people might think that this is subjective, but I really doubt anybody cannot see the actual superiority of the Quran as opposed to the words of human beings, because they're 2 different types of speech. We have the speech of somebody who is very limited in knowledge, in vocabulary, in every aspect. And you have somebody who's created, who is the creator of the heavens and the earth, who has created everything, who's created our minds, who's created language. Obviously, they're going to be a world apart. I'm going to touch on one aspect of this particular section of the verse, where we get the translation, all celestial bodies, because these bodies were not even discovered back then. People didn't know that there were other moons and other suns, so to speak, because we have a sun is just a star, and we know there are millions of stars out there. So the sun is one of these stars. So let's get to the language. So Allah uses kullun. Kullun means every or all. So if I said every student, there's actually a word coming after every student, or every book, every man, every person. You need a word to come after every or all to complete it. If you just say every, you're actually waiting for the speaker to add something to make sense of what you mean by every. If I said give me every what? Now, what the Quran does is it actually just says every. But at the same time, in Arabic, what you can do is, when you omit that word, you put a extra vowel mark known as the tanween. So kullun. So this extra vowel mark actually indicates that there's a word omitted, and that's what's happening in the verse there. A question to ask is, why was this omitted, and what meanings does this give? So, to understand this a bit better, what's happening actually is this actually creates ambiguity and generalization. And we also need to say, let us look at the context. We need to look at the context to understand this ambiguity. It's talking about Ash-Shams and Al-Qamar. Now, what we can do actually is go through the classical tafasir, the exegesis of the Quran by classical scholars. So we have two classical tafasir, and they both say the same thing. So I've quoted one of them, but they say relatively the same thing. So I've just put one up. This is, I think, from the first reference, which is Al-Kashaf by Alam al-Zamakhshari. And he was from the 11th century AD. So that's like 900 years ago. So what he's actually saying there, I'm gonna just translate that, not word for word, but the meaning. So the scholars are saying that the omitted pronoun, there's actually an omitted pronoun, all of them. And this refers to suns and moons. So you have to remember this. All they knew back then was there was one sun and there was one moon. So these scholars are saying that the language indicates that there are suns and moons. Would he refer to them by a pronoun? Because a pronoun refers to something that one has spoken of or that one knows about. You don't use a pronoun for something that is hidden or something that is not even known about. So in this case, we have a pronoun that's not even mentioned. So in other words, what's happening here? It refers to every celestial body. All celestial bodies, those that we know of, in the case of the revelation, what was known was just the two that were mentioned, the sun and the moon. But the point to note is that the pronoun in kullun is not mentioned. It refers to those that we know of and those that we will discover later on. And that's why the ambiguity there. At the same time, what it's saying, and this is another point of the actual language, is we have fi falakin. Fi falakin is a prepositional phrase, and that actually should have come after this verb, yasbahun, to swim. I'm not going to explain why this verb was used. I'll explain the rhetorical device of that. But just to quickly explain, fi falakin being put first, it actually creates what's known as ikhtisas. In that every celestial body is only fi falakin. Falakin, I'll explain this in a lot more detail, insha'Allah, means a rounded course. It's a round course that one swims along. And what it's saying is that every celestial body is in no other motion except for this rounded motion, for a rounded motion. And the indefiniteness of falakin indicates that each one has its own rounded course. Not that it's the same rounded course for everybody, but that each one has its own rounded course. And inshallah, I'll explain all this in a lot more detail in future videos once I get some challenges to this particular verse. Inshallah, I'll be looking forward to that, and I'll be looking actually forward also to explaining this verse in a lot more detail, because there's actually quite a lot more discussion. So this is actually the verse in Surah Al-Anbiya that we covered, and I want to specifically talk about this part here. Fi falakin. If you notice, falakin is indefinite, and we'll talk about why it's indefinite and what meaning indefiniteness gives. So let's start the grammatical analysis of this section. Fi falakin. So you can think of the harf jar fi as a dharf. Now, fi in this verse is what's known as fi adharfiyya. It has the meaning of adharf. In this case, it depends on the ism majroor. So here we have the harf jar and the ism majroor. And what will give the fi its meaning will be the word that comes after it. In this case, it's falak. Falak actually represents a place. So that means the fi has the meaning of in or on. Now, if the ism majroor was related to time, then the fi there will have the meaning of dharf zaman. So we have here fi falakin. Now let's get to what falakin means. Now I'm going to go through the classical dictionaries to understand what falak means. Now the first meaning that is given of falak, it's the circular movement of the stars or the planets in general. Now there's one thing to note about that. This terminology of falak being linked to the movement of the celestial bodies was actually a terminology that came out from the Quran based on this particular verse. So although it's mentioned in the classical dictionaries as meaning this, it was actually the Quran which invented this meaning. And we have, for example, astronomy in Arabic is called ilm al-falak, the study of the movement of the celestial bodies, astronomy. If you go back to ancient Arabic, prior to Islam, then falak actually has other meanings. They are the circular movement of ships. So for example, if we look at the following diagram, so we can see here, this diagram shows the movement of ships around the globe. And if you see the way the ships move, it's always in a circular motion. And that has to do with the fact that the earth is not flat. So this path that is taken by ships is called falak. And I've read some commentaries also to suggest the wood or the planks of wood used, the ones that bend and that are circular in shape, that are used to make ships, is also called falak. So you see a common theme here of something being circular or round. And from the word falak, we get the word, well, one of the words for ship in Arabic language, and that's fulk. So fulk means a ship. Another meaning of falak is a piece of land having a circular form. So you can see the connection between all these three meanings. Something that is round, that is circular. So, in other words, what it's saying is that every celestial body is in a circular path. And what are they doing in this path? Yasbahun. And we spoke about this in a previous video. Now, one question is, why is falak indefinite? So let's look at one of the tafsirs. This is from At-Tahrir wa Tanwir by a scholar by the name of Ibn Ashur. And what does he say? This is actually one of the commentaries related to the language. What he's saying is, in lafza falak amun. So in other words, the indefiniteness of falak makes the meaning am. Am means general. And then he explains what that means. أي لكل منها فلكه فهي أفلاك كثيرة. Aflak is the plural of falak. So circular motions. Kathira means numerous, plenty. So in other words, what it's saying is that when you make it indefinite, you're saying that there are many of these falak. So if, for example, it was al-falak, then this would indicate a specific falak, which would be incorrect. So then you'll be talking about one particular circular motion where all the bodies are running upon. And there was actually a video. This was what this person was suggesting the Quran says.
وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون
So now how the Abdul will explain to me that his God think that the day and the night, they float in an orbit the same as the sun and the moon. This is based in the ignorance of the God of Islam, because he think that the moon and the day, they are created as object. The God of Islam do not know that the night is the absence of light.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now, night is not the absence of light, as you suggest. The absence of light is darkness. So please don't confuse the two. Now, you said that the verse mentions the night and the day, along with the sun and the moon. And then it mentions that each of them is in its own orbit. Now, if you see this video in front of you, this is the Earth. And as you can see, we have night and we have day. What is causing night and day? It's actually two things. You have the sun on your right hand side, and you also have the Earth orbiting on its axis. So there's an orbit. As you can see in the video, the day and the night is actually moving around the Earth. It's spinning around the Earth. And you know, I challenge you to produce something better than this verse, if you can. You're an Arab, you know the language. Try to produce something that is more superior to this verse.
وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون.
It is He who created the night and the day, and the sun and the moon. All the celestial bodies swim along, each in its own rounded course.